Good afternoon. Welcome to Joe's Book Review. And this one I have today, this is one I thought about for a while on how to present it. Because the subject is actually The Sandman by Neil Gaiman. And I know there's a lot of just devoted followers to this work and everything it means to them. It's one of those things that there are more loyal followers on this Sandman character alone than probably rivals some small religions and cults. So I'm not trying to say anything against any of them, not to mention I'm on board, but I've only recently picked this up within the last year or so. So my full knowledge of the lore is less than someone who's been along the ride for years. So, that being said, let me come through and give you what I know and what I can give you. For starters, on the top of it, I recommend anyone to read these. The Sandman storylines, their story arcs, and even their one-shot kind of comics, they come through so intelligently written. They bring forth so many pieces of different cultures and icons and myths and legends that to see them in an almost contemporary setting it's groundbreaking. This guy did a fantastic job on this. Couldn't think more highly of him than I did. Now, let me give a small little background on this for me. So, I had always been curious to read the Sandman stories, and in fact, I think a couple of years back, my library had graphic novels of most of the stories already out there on their shelves. So I started getting them from the library about one at a time, and I'd read through it. I'd be very happy with what I see, be very happy at what I read, and your imagination just takes over when you read these stories. But somewhere around the fourth or fifth story arc, there might be like 8 or 9 in total, give or take, but the library just got rid of them. So I was in the middle of reading about this, and my jaw just dropped. Like, oh, are you kidding me? Why is this stuff not there anymore? Now, I never did learn why they weren't there any longer. I don't know if it was a mature content thing. I don't know if it was, hey, when people don't take out books too often, they come off the shelves to make room for other books on the shelves, because it is still a physical medium for the most part, most libraries. Even though they're branching out of that right now, but at the time. Or if it's one of those things where who knows if someone had a letter writing campaign and people were up in arms to ban this stuff and that's why it's gone. All I know is I'm going in there to get the next chapter, and the next chapter was gone. And so were all the previous chapters, all gone. So I didn't get to finish them back then. But wait enough time, it comes around. Now, in current days, right now it's at the end of 2022, I know that in the last couple of years there was a lot of talk of actual productions happening for this work. Simultaneously, Netflix was doing a show, which has already had the first season. It's actually already dropped. I watched it. I loved it. Totally recommend it to anybody. And good news is, they've been approved for a second season. But, again, a year or two ago, we heard this was happening. We heard it was coming along. But simultaneously, I think they were trying to do like an ensemble cast for an audiobook version. Would love to get on board with that. And I believe that Joseph Gordon-Levitt, I'm probably saying his name wrong, he was the main character in it too. So one of these days I wouldn't mind listening to it to see how they describe certain things, because the stories were originally in comic form. It's a visual medium, and some of the visuals were absolutely outstanding. To have it in audiobook form, let's see how they describe it. But anyway, there was a lot of productions happening. It was coming out, and I said, you know something? Let me get on board with this. And I saw these omnibus editions. They're leather bound. They're about 1,000 pages deep, and just 2 of these cover the entire 75 issue run of the Sandman. In fact, they kind of throw in a couple extra issues on top of that, like the Sandman special and some actually Vertigo comics on the side. So it's like 40-40, give or take. And you can just knock through them one after one. They are beautiful to look at. They're going to look fantastic on the top of my shelf in that little space right above my head around there. Um, the only thing I was unhappy about, though, physically, is on these things they have this silvery leaf that goes up and down the spine, so it actually looks beautiful. Well, the problem is that silvery leaf kind of comes off with the oils on your fingers. So as I'm sitting here and I'm holding the book while I'm reading it, it's open. I got some smudges. Look at that. Got some smudges up here and down here. Actually, let me do this. Right there and right there. So it's an eyesore to me. I'll obviously live with it. I'm not going to go out and buy another one. I mean, these things are quite pricey to begin with. But that's one of the things I wish they would have known better when they were making these physically. What I had done actually was I waited for Prime Day, I think 2021, and these books had a deep discount on Prime Day. So I said, let me have them. And they all got delivered to me. Now, actually, it was funny because the first one got delivered all banged up in the corner. It was all messed up. So, returned that, got a new one. Very happy with what I got so far. Okay, that's the reason why. Let me get past that. As I was saying, 1,000 pages each, about 40 issues per page. And in only 2 of these versions, you get to have the entire collection. Now, what is the Sandman? It's actually a tougher question than you would think. And I understand these things were comics, but these things were on the Vertigo line eventually, and they're there for mature content. They're very highbrow, and the way that Neil Gaiman weaves this mastery of a whole bunch of different lore does make it very difficult to talk about, so I'll try the best. The Sandman is actually one of 7 beings known as the Endless. And he's actually, while he is the Sandman, he also goes by the name of Morpheus and a whole bunch of others, but he is the incarnation of Dream. And I'll tell you right now, incarnation might be the bad word, but I'll just say it for the moment to get past this. So he is Dream of the Endless. All 7 of them all have different aspects of nature. I'll use that word. Aspects of nature that they are patterned after. They're pretty much like they encapsulate the ideas of each one that they are. And they also have different names, too, like that. So one is the idea of desire. One is despair. There's destiny, destruction, death, delirium. We have an interesting backstory. Was originally delight and then became delirium. And there's Dream. Those are your 7 Endless. And these 7 Endless, they're not gods. They make it a real point to let you know they're not gods. And a lot of the things, and you actually read this in other Gaiman stories, is gods exist because they are worshipped. And sometimes when worship decreases and gods stop being worshipped, they stop being gods. These are like celestial beings of a point. And if they were never known of, if they're never worshipped in any way, shape, or form, they would still exist. They would still do what they have to do. Eventually they tell you that these 7 beings were actually, they're all siblings to each other. They're all brothers and sisters to each other. And they're all children of Father Time and Mother Night. So, I mean, just on this part, we're up there. We're talking about almost ephemeral concepts here. But what do they do? I mean, you got these 7 beings, so what? Well, they possess their own realms, and they can do whatever they want in their realms. Now, they even fight amongst each other of what their roles are. Some say, you're supposed to do things for humanity, or life in general, because you can go to other stars and other worlds. But you're supposed to, be servicing them in their functions. Whereas other ones kind of use life to toy with and kind of make their own pleasure out of, and seeing how they jump through hoops, how they deal with their heartbreak, how they deal with their joy, whatever the case may be. So it's very hard to say what the reason for them are, but the fact is that they exist. And they will come together and communicate with each other from time to time. The one thing they do say, though, is they are not, there's like one rule, is not allowed to harm one another. No blood may be spilled of one endless by another endless. And they kind of give you one of those, like in Ghostbusters, it will be bad. They say that it will bring down the wrath of the fates. And that would think that they might be destroyed in some fashion. But here's the thing. With the 7 of these people, if they die, another person or entity takes their place and becomes them. And once they become them, it's as if they were always them. So again, weird rules, weird everything else, but that's what happens here, is you're following most of the stories that have to deal with dreams, or people who dream in what they call the dream realm, and the Sandman being there and maybe changing what they're thinking about so it goes in a different direction, or he might even add some elements to it because the person might need it or maybe doesn't want it, but he's going to throw it in there anyway. It's very hard to get into it, but that's what the overall pantheon, if you want to call it that, of these entities are and how they relate to one another. And some of these stories are them relating to one another, the outcomes. Because along the way, and they don't explain the reason why for a long time, Desire hates Dream. Even though they're brother and sister, Desire's looking to knock Dream down a bunch of pegs. It's one of these things that Desire believes, that Dream believes that he's more powerful than anybody else, and that he lords above them his abilities, his realm, and what he does with people. So Desire is constantly trying to knock him down. In fact, the opening story, Dream is captured, and he's actually captured for over 100 years, and while he's doing that, he's not monitoring his realm. His dream realm crumbles, dreams escape, nightmares escape. Nothing's going the way it should be. There's a sleeping sickness throughout the land. Some people not going to be able to go to sleep, and some people sleeping almost forever. And that whole arc happens, but Desire is one of the architects of him being captured to begin with, hoping that if he's away and the dream realm crumbles, when he comes back, he might be knocked down a couple pegs. He might be noticing the fact that he's not infallible and might not think he's that superior to anyone else. And Desire constantly does this to him over and over again. Now, moving on to the actual books themselves. So, like I said, there are story arcs that take place over like 6, 7, 8 issues. And these 8-issue travelogues have one focused theme on it. Whether it's going to be something called a dream vortex and how it kind of affects the world and comes around. Sometimes these things are more about following this one woman's lineage through her asleep mother to her and what it means to the future and everything else. There's a whole story where Lucifer who's actually he's in these books more often than you would think, says, something? I'm done with this job. I'm only ruling hell because God told me to. I'm closing it. I'm done. And you follow him, closing up hell and giving the key to Morpheus, saying, it's all yours now. Do what you want. And now Morpheus has to find a new ruler of hell. And what happens is, you get Odin, you get Bastet, you get you get angels, you get people from Japanese mythology. All these people come together in a conclave to kind of bid for, I deserve hell, because the realm is still vast, and the fact that it is huge means it comes with power, and everyone wants to have power, be it for just themselves, to be more mighty and magnificent, or to conquer others, which is usually what people do when they have power. So, again, story arc on that. There's even an interesting one where a character is brought back who always had this dream realm, a fantasy realm, and is hanging out with birds and hanging out with rats and monkeys and big old bear type people, and is just like the princess in this realm, and they all kind of servants to her, and then they're trying to escape what's called the cuckoo, and you don't know what the cuckoo is for a long time, but they have this big fantasy thing that goes on, but while that's happening, it's causing other issues like in the world. So now you have other people who are friends of this woman, trying to find a way to get into the dream realm to intercept her to make things better for everyone. Again, I'm taking this at like 50,000 feet, so the details are about there, but obviously the details are more important. I'm not telling about. One more time. The primary thing is big story arcs taking place over multiple issues, and that gives you full-on stories that hit different ideas of mythology, religion, history, literature, folklore. They're all embedded in this. And even as he writes it and as they draw it, it's all done blending romance and science fiction and fantasy and dramas. To take all this stuff and put it together is a hell of a mixing pot. The salad that he creates is just delicious to read. But besides these story arcs, very often between the story arcs, there are these one-off stories that tangentially might have the character of the Sandman in it, being the Lord of Dreams and whatnot, but they're like the best written stories of them all. For instance, he has one about the dream of cats, and I was very happy that Netflix dropped this as half of an episode after the season was dropped, which just talks about, cats used to rule the world, and then one day they were playing with little humans because they were giant cats, and they were playing with them, and they would eat them and hunt them, this, that, and the other, until one day the humans just dreamed it was different, and then boop, the world changed, and it's the world that you know now. So the cats are now trying to say, all we got to do is dream together, and we can get this back to the way it was. It's the power of dreams. Doesn't seem like the most interesting story when I say it like this, but when you read it, it pulls you along, cell by cell, phrase by phrase, and it's just, when you're done, you're kind of awestruck, and you're happy you read it. But it's like a one-off story. They don't talk about it before and hardly ever talk about it since. They do another one, it's one of my favorites. It's about a Roman senator who pretty much puts on ragged clothes and he goes down to the street and he begs for money about once a year. And he brings a little confidant with him. And they're just talking on the steps the whole time. But the conversations they have are just very meaningful. And it's a great just tableau of seeing what's going on and watching what they're talking about, knowing who they are really. You take away just amazing stories. They've even got one where they kind of mix a couple other ones together. So there was one about one of the muses called Calliope, who was imprisoned by a writer who wanted to make it big, but she's in prison, and he finds a way to pretty much abuse her and get her gift. But he's not letting her free. It's slavery. And later on, you realize that she had been married to the Sandman way long time back. And on another story that takes place in the past, there's actually a character of Johanna Constantine. Now, we know about Constantine from modern day. I think he makes some appearances in those DC shows on the WB. I know Keanu Reeves had a movie for Constantine. I think he's even having a sequel coming out soon. Or they're going to start making it soon. But we know about the character. But Johanna is actually like a long lost relative from the past who had the same kind of like fighting spirituality and fighting demons kind of nature to her. It's like supernatural, but before supernatural was a thing. But she actually tracks down Morpheus over the years because apparently he actually found a guy that he gave unlimited life to, that they met one day every 100 years to see how things were going. Again, one-off story, very interesting. And then she gets involved with it too. And one day he says, do me a favor, I need you to go get something for me. My son's held up in the castle. Can you just get him and bring him back home, please? And the son actually ends up being just a head, a sentient head. And it turns out that the son is Orpheus from Greek mythology. In fact, after reading that story, I went back and I read about Orpheus and I read about Ophelia. So, just, again, amazing Greek stuff that I went out through and actually made an audio version of the tragedy of Ophelia and Orpheus. I'll put a link down below in case you want to listen to that. But he has the one-off stories where it's like, this is my son, this is my wife, and you don't think anything is going to happen to it. But then one of the things that did happen, which I found completely amazing, and I would love to find Neil Gaiman one day to ask him this question, is they did what's called the Sandman special. Kind of like a one-off outside of the 75-issue run, and this is somewhere around issue 37 or 40 or whatnot. And in this story, it's pretty much the story of Orpheus marrying Ophelia, who then gets bitten on the ankle, and then she goes to hell, and then he wants to go chase her in hell and see if he can get her back. And they say, okay, you've moved us, go ahead and take her, just walk through hell, but she'll be right behind you. Don't turn back until you leave the cave. Then you'll have her forever. But if you turn around, she's ours. And of course, 5 steps before the end, he's got to turn around, and boom, she goes back. But what the special does is, before it gets into that specifically, it shows their marriage. It shows the Sandman or Morpheus being with Calliope. It shows that they're celebrating their son getting married, and all the other celestial endless are there at the wedding as well. You get to see them bickering amongst each other and what have you. But then after the whole Hell saga, you see it continue further where he's in despair and now he's being kind of a bum and he gets ripped apart by some beings on the ocean side and rip him limb from limb and leave his head behind, but he's still alive. So you get kind of an origin for that too. And it also takes the place where you knew Calliope was a wife and is now his active wife in this storyline. And I always wonder, when these issues happen, because the Calliope and the Johanna Constantine with Orpheus ones were like issue 10 and issue 18. A year and a half before the Sandman special came out. And I always wonder, did he know that was the story that he wanted to tell of those characters before he put them in? Was it, let me drop the eggs now, or drop the seeds now, and it will germinate into this special a year or so from now when I finally get to it? Or did this man actually put characters out there, then decide he wanted to go through them more, and imagined together the story that became the Sandman special? And I definitely applaud the first, saying, I know I'm going to get to this, let me just drop some things now, and I'll come back to it later on. That's great. You want to see this in TV shows. I wish they did that in Lost more often. But I'm more impressed if he took some crumbs that he put down before and then used them to bake something new later, not knowing he wanted to go from A to B. So I can't tell which of the ways he could have done it was more impressive, and I'd love to know which way he actually did it. I'm tangenting on this one, but that's what I wanted to say about that one. So, the first omnibus edition that I have here, Omnibus 1, is the first 40 issues and includes that Sandman special. And I'll tell you what, the art in here is absolutely fantastic as well. Usually has Sam Keith doing the art for a long time, and other people come in and take care of some of the business as well. He even gets a hold of Charles Vess, who is a fantastic artist, and he uses him for some Shakespeare chapters that are in here. Again, worth the read. When it goes on further, the story has to continue, so it continues in the second omnibus, which takes you to the end of the run. It takes you through issue 75, which is the last one that Sandman ran, and it has other Vertigo issues in between. One thing I will say, though, is this second half of the story, personally, I think the art goes downhill. From what I saw in the first one, and granted, I had read some of those stories years ago when the library had those chapters available for me, Till when it came to this, I wasn't a fan. It just was getting more abstract art, and it didn't really pull it in for me. But then again, I'm just one person. So, I will say, though, that towards the end, like the last one or two stories, they do bring in other artists. And there's another one with that guy I told you, Gad, who, I'm sorry, his name is Hob, who lived and every 100 years would go to a bar and see Sandman and talk to him for a while. His last story, the art knocked it out of the park. I mean, they left on a high note when it came to that kind of stuff. I was very happy that it didn't end with what was happening through the majority of the beginning, or from the first 3 quarters of this. But again, you still get the stories. Art be damned, you still get that Neil Gaiman magic that does these things that other people love, and I have become enraptured with myself. So the main question is, if 75 issues plus a couple extra one-shots becomes 2 omnibus editions, what's the third one about? Well, there were other stories that took place outside of the actual Sandman run, and most of them didn't even have him in it. It just dealt with the other Endless. And more importantly, it dealt with Death. Now, Death was very interesting. Death is pretty much like this little goth girl, dresses in black, has a little unk around her neck, and she's very high-spirited. She has a kind of love for life. And it became one of those things that Death always did Death's job, just like Dream always did Dream's job. But then, once every 100 years, Death would come to the world and live as a human for 24 hours. Just kind of learn the people that were out there. And I think on one of those occasions, she noticed that everyone was like really afraid of Death and didn't want to die and whatever else. So, kind of had this epiphany for the character to gently bring these people from being dead over to the other side. And a lot of the stories, even in the Sandman issues when Death is relevant, walks over with a smile, like, "Hey, Doug, how you doing? Okay, it's time for you to come with me. You all right? Let's go." Doug would be like, "I don't want to die." I was like, "Well, we all do, but here you are. Let's go take a walk." And kind of like gave him a smile, held out her hand, lifted him up off the ground, and walked him away. Like, became a cheerful being to usher these people onwards to their death future. It wasn't about a Grim Reaper and you're going to hell and you're going to hell. It really was a nice way to let people go. And when Death started doing this, Death started kind of enjoying the job and looked forward to meeting people in their last moment. A moment that they would need someone with a smile to help them move along. So that character was very well flushed out. So what happened was there were other side issues that mainly dealt with Death that they've collected as part of the stories in the omnibus. So if I go through the list I have in front of me, there's like 4 stories that deal with Death as a character alone. There's like 3 issues here called The High Cost of Living, 3 issues here called The Time of Your Life, which is one of these things where characters from the other stories come into play. And one of the characters actually had a little boy who ends up dying, and now the 2 mothers are trying to fight over who can take the kid's place with Death. Let me die so this kid can live further. And then there's a whole discussion about it, and the story opens up, and you kind of follow it along, and you're taking on a journey. It's a very good journey, too. One of the things, stories that they put in this last omnibus, Omnibus 3, was also one regarding the Sandman that was originally written for DC. It's very interesting because originally the character of the Sandman was almost like this film noir detective, like you'd see the Shadow or maybe an early Batman. That's what the Sandman was. And he had almost like a gas mask on, and he had a weird gun that shot like sleep gas or sleeping sand. And when he came upon the criminals, he would do that, and now you're asleep, and boom, the cops will be here to take you away. So that was the original Sandman. And when Neil Gaiman was tapped to make a Sandman for what was then the present day, he kind of morphed it into this whole thing I told you about with the endless and the dream realm and everything else. But he took elements of that noir character and made them relate to the actual dream. So one of these is actually one called Sandman Midnight Theater, which goes on one of that old Sandman's kind of escapades. And they kind of give you that little link of saying he kind of was able to take a piece of dream, make it into his character, or vigilante, should I say, and then move on further. So the two exist in the same realm, they exist in the same world, but Dream was captured when this other noir one existed. But one doesn't reboot and overwrite the other one, which is just clever writing. I'm sorry, I can't say that enough. Another collection in here was very interesting. It was called the Dream Hunters. And the Dream Hunters, it was like a story that was created based on a Japanese fable. And a lot of different influences were taken and they were used in this long story. And the story had like about 3 different vignettes in it along the way. It starts out with like 2 animals trying to get this monk to flee his temple so they can just live in there. And of course he sees through it and lives through that whole thing. But one of them was a fox, and the fox starts to love him. And then they have a kind of like relationship. And then that kind of moves on and on and on. And then it brings in some other emperor type figure who hates this guy for some reason and sends spirits to go kill him. Well, the fox intercedes and the spirits kind of kill the fox, but now the guy wants to save the fox and he goes to see the Dream Master and see if he can help him out. Now the original one that's done in here was very well done. It's not like your typical comic book. There was like 1 splash page of actual like art, not comic art, and then 1 page of writing. So you'd have the 1 image to go along with all your writing, which I'd actually seen once recently. I did a comic audiobook during this year called December. It's a Roadkill comic. I can put that down below as well. Had the exact same format. 1 page of writing, 1 splash page of image. Which is good because it's more reading than seeing. But he tells this whole tale, brings in some of his elements that he doesn't really name from the actual Sandman issues, but you know who they are because you're familiar already. And tells his whole nice long tale. And I guess sometime after that came out, they decided to actually do a comic book form of the same story. So you get both versions in here, which is very nice to see as well. The last thing I'm going to talk about, which is how it ended, or how the omnibus finishes with all the stories they tell. I was doubly happy to read this story because I was listening to a Neil Gaiman interview during this year, probably after I finished reading the 3rd omnibus. And, no, actually after I finished the 2nd one, because what he was saying was, I finished the stories, they always want me to come back, I don't really want to come back, so he told his story, it ended, that's where he wanted to keep it, and not, like, reboot it or anything else. But he did mention one thing in this interview. People say, what's the one story that you didn't get a chance to write? And he said, I always wondered, when the first issue opens, there is a Illuminati type group, and they do an incantation trying to summon death and capture death. And the reason being, some of the people in this Illuminati clan have sons who like died overseas in war. So they want to capture death and have him or her give their people back, give their sons back. Well, as they go through this incantation, it turns out they don't summon death. They summon Dream, which starts the 100 years or so of Dream being captured in the bottom of this castle. So when asked the question to Neil Gaiman, what story have you never written? He said, I've always intimated that Dream had gone through some ordeal that left him in a weakened state. And it was only because he was in a weakened state was he allowed to be captured by the spell of mortals to begin with. Doesn't matter the ingredients they use. There's like, sand from tears of something else, and a feather from a angel, and a stone of key, and yada yada. But they said, why was Dream weak enough that this spell actually worked? Especially because it wasn't supposed to work for him anyway. Or so we thought. And I had listened to that. I was like, wow, I wonder if he ever gets around to this story. That'd be fantastic to see one day. Well, apparently he did. Let's not forget, these stories were finished written, the first 75 issues, 20 years ago. Maybe 25. So, the one story called the Sandman Overture does exactly that. And I don't realize it until later on, but there's some long story about how one of the incarnations of Dream on another planet, which happens to be this form of flower, dies. And I understand I talked before about, hey, when one dies, one takes its place, but this thing wasn't supposed to die. And how it died was weird, even for the planet and realm it's in. So all of a sudden, now there's a conclave of all the Dream entities coming together in one place to discuss it, saying, hey, something's wrong, let's go figure this out. And it takes it on a long journey of trying to figure out who's who, who's the real one, who needs to go do something, who needs to stay here and fight, whatever. And they all start slowly kind of bamfing out too. Incidentally, while this is going on, it's like about 7 or 8 issue story. The art here, the colors, the paintings that you see in this story are just as beautiful as it gets. And it fit the storyline, it fit the milieu of this whole Sandman arc anyway. So it's in there. In fact, sometimes you have to like open up a double gatefold thing to see a whole 4-page one picture. Or sometimes all of a sudden you're reading it like this, and now you got to turn it, and it's kind of slowly going, and then the next couple pages are sideways before it comes back. So just really trying to trip you out as a reader. But as he goes through this whole thing, nice story, beginning, middle, and end, shows a nice, it wraps it up, and it gives you a lot of, oh my god, I never saw this from the beginning, and yet he kind of spelled it out for you in some fashion. Now that you're seeing it, it's something else, and comes to the end, and now the Dream that we know is like, I gotta get home. I've been doing this for too long. I need to get back to my own duties. Let me go do that. And it kind of sucks him into why he was able to be taken for the first place. In fact, it's interesting because the last page panel is one of the first page panels of the first issue. So by reading this, you can almost go from the ending to the beginning and back again, just keep going in a loop. But I was just so glad that the concept that he brought up in an interview, he actually got to do. So, and I'm glad I knew that ahead of time, because it kind of dawned on me around the end of the second to last issue or in the middle of the last issue. I was like, I think I know where this is going. This is fantastic. And just my excitement came through there. So, that's all I'm going to say about this right now. I know I've been on here for a long time. I'm not trying to discount any of the people's opinions who love this to death. I wasn't trying to describe this in such level of detail that you would just understand it the way I say it. I wanted to give everyone listening the kind of idea of why people find this fascinating, what you can expect when you get into it, provided you do get into it, and how you can explore it further. Again, my tastes are all over the map, and you can almost see some of those in the titles of the other episodes I have out here. But I, for one, give you a full recommendation. Find a way to read this. Maybe you got some friends that have these. I know they're in trade paperback format. They're in this beautiful format that I picked up too, but I knew I was going to like this, so I just didn't even think about the expense. Not to mention it was kind of a gift for myself. That's what I got for you. I hope this works. I hope you find some value in this, but let me know. Again, I'll pop on my little thing up here saying, please subscribe if you like this. It's always good to know that people are watching, that people are liking it. Get those numbers up. All right. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I hope if you have holidays that you celebrate this year, you celebrate them very well. Bye bye now.